Hello, Renegade marketers. If this is your first time listening, welcome. And if you're a regular listener, welcome back. Before I present this episode, I'm thrilled to announce the first ever in person CMO Super Huddle that we're hosting in Palo Alto on November 8th, 2024. The theme is Daring Greatness in 2025, and we're rocking a full slate of inspiring speakers with ample time for networking. Early bird tickets are on sale now, so grab yours at cmohuddles.com. It's gonna be flocking amazing. You're about to listen to a recording from CMO Huddles Studio, our live show featuring the accomplished marketing leaders of CMO Huddles, a community that's always sharing, caring, and daring each other to greatness. The marketing leaders of this episode are Marca Armstrong of Sensera Systems, Lesley Davis of WEI, and Isabelle Papoulias of BackBox. They share how they've structured and evolved their marketing teams over time, filling in critical skill gaps, fostering strong cultures, and aligning to revenue goals. If you like what you hear, please subscribe to this podcast and leave a review. You'll be supporting our quest to be the #1 B2B marketing podcast. All right, let's dive in. Welcome to CMO Huddle Studio, the live streaming show dedicated to inspiring B2B greatness. I'm your host, Drew Neiser, live from my home studio in New York City. Whether you're a marketing department of 5 or 500, no CMO can succeed without a great team, working in sync like an Olympic rowing crew. It's about coming together into a powerhouse that's greater than the individual players. When it's working, it looks effortless. The oars are productively, barely creating a splash. But when it's not, sloppiness and fatigue abound. And when you dissect the problems, you often find the talent is in the wrong seats or simply incapable of pulling their weight. It's a lot to sort out, which is why we've assembled an all-star team of CMOs to share their approach to building and nurturing dream teams. So with that, let's bring on Marca Armstrong, Head of Marketing and Customer Success at Sensera Systems, who already joined us on the show to shed light on intricacies of leadership and strategies and customer marketing. Hello, Marca. Welcome back.
Hi, Drew. How are you?
I'm doing great now. So how are you and where are you?
Physically, I am in beautiful Lafayette, Colorado, about 15 miles east of Boulder, 30 miles north of Denver, and I am doing great.
So you joined Sensera in December. So
Yes.
I know Sensera is a startup. So talk a little bit about your team and what you're looking at and in terms of your planning.
So when I joined Sensera, the marketing department was very transactional in nature. And what I mean by that, it was, I need a data sheet. Can you do this for me? I need a lead. Can you find it? We're going to an event, make it happen. There wasn't a lot of thought leadership coming out of the marketing team, which is part of the reason that I joined and I was hired. And so the functional areas were deficient from a product marketing, strategy, overall thought leadership perspective. And there were some really great people and still are that were doing, like I said, the execution. So in the past 3.5 months, what I've focused on is to try and bring in more of that thought leadership on the product marketing side, make sure that we have in-house the skills that we need from a demand generation perspective, because we were heavily reliant on outsourced teams to develop that top of funnel for our organization. And then also bring on an agency that can help us in our positioning because it's sorely needed based on where we are from a startup perspective.
It's a lot to sort through. And it's so funny because this is often the way it is at startups before they hire a CMO is that they're at the beck and call of the CEO and the head of sales, and they just support them. That's what there's like sales support and sales enablement, which are important. But that's not marketing. Talk a little bit about the structure that you're seeing in what sort of, yeah, again, you're not a billion-dollar IBM, huge company. So you really have to get, we'll call it player managers, I'm imagining. Talk a little bit about how you're developing this team. You did outline all the functions, but are you
Right.
hiring for each individual function, for example?
Great question. So let me go to what I call the communications and the brand and the PR function. I actually have incredible talent internally for someone who has never done that skill set before. They've actually showed interest in it. They're a designer by background, but they single-handedly pulled together our presence at the largest construction show. That's our vertical in the January timeframe. So they have an interest in events. They have a keen understanding on how to position the company. And so from that perspective, there's a learning opportunity to take this person and say, hey, let's move into this place that I'm going to call communications and brand. Right. So that was one thing. Then there was a person who was doing content, but really just blogs and not much more than that, case studies, right?
Right.
And then from there, ultimately, I said, we really need product marketing. We need somebody that could intersect with product and engineering and sit between that group and sales, and then figure out how to make sure that whatever we're putting in market is relevant to the client. That individual decided that wasn't her jam. So I'm in the process of hiring somebody who is a core product marketer, right? So I had to go outside for that. Then on the lead generation side, again, I felt really strongly we needed somebody internally who could manage that process and again, sit between whatever we're doing from an advertising perspective and sales and rev ops. And rev ops happens to fall under me at this moment in time. So it's kind of an interesting trifecta of marketing ops, rev ops, and demand gen. It's actually kind of nice to have it under one house, so under one roof. So I went and I hired for that. And then there's this lovely thing we call marketing operations, right? Which is, all the plumbing. And we we are currently doing it externally, but we really need to, I think, ultimately bring that internal. So those are the functions and the people. And then what I'm finding is there's great talent in the Denver market, especially on the product marketing side, which surprised me. And then I've got a lot of marketing ops people floating out there. But like I said, I'm trying to both nurture internal and bring external where the resource doesn't exist. And I think, this goes to a future question, but I also need to know what my strengths are and what I have to bring in to complement me. I think that's one thing as a seasoned CMO, you know what you do well and where you need the help.
Yeah. Well, there was a lot to unpack there. And so I'm just going to check some boxes. So, first thing is, yeah, assessing the internal team. And if there's talent, but maybe in the wrong chair, you're moving them and exposing them for a growth opportunity, which is really rewarding because that's awesome when that
Yes.
happens. I am happily shocked to hear that you're thinking you're going to find a product marketing person locally relatively easily because that seems to be the hardest role to fill across. And maybe it's the Silicon Valley folks that are really struggling if they're trying to find someone locally. So that makes sense. One question I have for you is I think about rev ops, marketing ops, and wondering if there is such a thing as just a blended of that. It's one kind of group that just is the source of data and truth. I don't know. Is that wishful thinking?
I think it's possible. Right now, I've got two really bright individuals, one doing the rev ops and one doing the marketing ops piece of it. And I don't know that it is a one size fits all function necessarily, because from a marketing ops perspective, you've got a different tech stack that you do on the rev ops side of the house, but the two are intrinsically linked. And then certainly the rev ops individual is, working on all the nurture campaigns and the lists and the outbound calling and what have you that the account executives and account managers are doing. Where on the marketing ops side, we're trying to get all the stuff inbound and make sure that we're dissecting it to a point we can turn it over and have, higher close rates. I think they can sit under me happily for the time being. And we've had some changeover in sales. So I stuck my hand up and said I'd help. And I'm actually seeing some great synergy there, but I don't know that it's a one size fits all.
Well,
First,
then how many sort of part of this is direct report management, right? And how
yeah,
many direct reports do you have? And in this structure, how many will you end up with? Let's say you still have RevOps.
I'll end up with six because I've also got customer success. And six is manageable. I've, former days had as many as 10. Because at the end of the day, I need to be able to have my fingers like in the cookie jar deep enough so I know what's going on.
Right. Because yes, I mean, again, this is a startup. You are, this is not a case where it's a large organization and you are sort of leading marketing. You're running marketing. You're in it. And so part of this, yes, you did talk about, knowing your weaknesses, which is, but also this is about how you believe marketing works.
Mhm.
those 6 direct reports are going to be the function of, well, these are the levers I need to pull to make this work. And I appreciate the notion of having marketing ops in-house. I can't think of a single CMO in the leader program that doesn't have it in-house. It's just too important these days.
We're leaning on a lot of external consultants right now. And I have my demand gen person is sort of pseudo marketing ops at the moment, but it's not a sustainable model as we are in this rapid growth phase. I need to bring that internally. So, and I'm being very selective on who I bring in, because to your point, the people that come on board with a company of our size, they need to be players and then coaches, not necessarily of people under them, but to others across the organization. And that's the interesting spin being in a startup Series A company. You're
Yeah.
educating sales, you're educating products, you're educating, I'm educating the CEO on a daily basis.
Yeah, and there's a lot of other things. By the way, I didn't mean to say you shouldn't have consultants. There are some specialists out there like a Spiralize, which can help with A/B testing, and they're just so good at it. You would want to do that. Or if you're going to ultimately roll out an ABM, someone like a John Russo, those guys can add so much value that it's worth it. I'm just talking about the basic function. All right.
We're on the same page.
Yeah. Okay. We'll come back to you, Marca. Lots more to unpack, but let's bring on Lesley Davis, CMO at Waggoner Engineering or WEI. You have to tell me, which should we be calling you?
It can be Waggoner or WEI, your choice.
Okay. All right. Right now I'm going with Waggoner. Okay. So you're here for the first time. Welcome.
I am. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's exciting to see you here. And so when you started at Waggoner, it was a marketing team of you plus one, sorry, make it 2. And you had to build a team. So let's talk about, sort of your several months and months ahead of Marca, but talk about how you structured your team. And
Well, one thing in my favor, I had 2 things in my favor. And the first was, as far as identifying roles, there is one key role in this industry that is actually usually the first hire when they start to delve into marketing and they feel like, okay, we're ready. And that role was empty. So I didn't have to wonder for long. I knew immediately before I even joined, okay, we've got to hire someone for this. The other part of this is I knew we were going to double in size. That was a massive part of the interview process. And we're actually almost 200% bigger in 2 years. So instead of looking around and assessing what I did or didn't have, I was able to dream about what we're going to need when we're doubled in size, which actually did me a lot of favors and led to a lot less investigation, if you will.
so what was that first hire?
A proposal manager. That's a very big deal in the AEC industry.
Got it. Because that's how you actually get revenue is if the proposals aren't right and in the
Correct.
system, you can't convert anything. So you can have as many leads as you want. All right. So that's a
Correct.
critical one. But so I'm imagining that you created your org chart for that growth thing and then you started to fill in.
Yes, that's exactly what I did. I made 3 hires in the first year. So we got to a good size pretty quickly. I'm grateful I had a leadership team that backed that and knew it was needed. And we were off and running once that was complete.
And talk about, so what were the others? So we had a proposal
So
manager and then talk about the other parts of the team.
I will. And actually, it was 4 hires. That's wild. I think I did that in like less than 4 months. It's crazy. Proposal manager first. And I believe quickly after that was a proposal coordinator. We work with governmental entities. They must go out for proposals to give work over a certain amount. And of course, if we're doubling in size, we need double the work. So proposal manager, proposal coordinator, graphics, and now marketing specialist that has carried the weight in about 15 different areas. And I'm grateful for every single person who jumped on and said yes to the opportunity to join.
So the first part of this is there was a certain amount of demand coming in, being generated either by sales directly or anything that you had going. But then we
Correct.
start to sort of think where marketing is actually creating some demand and managing it. So talk a little bit about that in terms of, because was there a demand generation engine or was that just sales?
It's sales. It was mostly sales. And because we were a smaller firm, I mean, we were 80 people. It was also getting people that had been here 20 years sitting in one office together, doing it the same way to think about, okay, this is where we're at. But if we're going to go where we're going, we've got to operate in a very different manner. And so I'm excited and proud. It's been a fun ride.
How many people are at the company now?
We are at 274, but we expect to double again within maximum of 2 years.
So that's triple in terms of staff size overall from the company. So first of all, the role of marketing must have changed through the course of that growth.
Agreed. It did a lot more from here, I'll hurry and do this proposal or flyer to, hey, I understand this project requires public meetings and it's a little bit at this point where we need to be helpful to you. Let us develop the graphics. Please don't develop them yourselves. Like, let us help.
Yes. So you're retraining the organization on the function while you're supporting them and you're building the team. So as you look at your structure now with an organization that's 3 times larger,
Yeah.
what's your charge look like or need to evolve? How's it need to evolve?
We need an internal comms person of some kind coming soon. I think the next hire behind that should probably be, I'd love someone with photography experience so that we're keeping that in-house and someone with that innate knowledge of what they're trying to accomplish. And beyond that, like my dream is earned media, public relation, someone out there, you know, pitching constantly so that we can get the spotlight that our SMEs deserve.
Yeah, because you want to be a brand that's recognized in there because that's got to
Yes.
matter both in terms of inbound and also just securing business these days. Awareness matters, right? I mean, so that earned media can certainly support. So I'm thinking about you didn't really have any of the challenges that Mark had necessarily. There's a people in necessarily the wrong seats, but talk a little bit about sort of suddenly there's a team and how are you helping the team work together and nurturing that team while you're simply going, okay, guys, crank out those reports.
It's so hard because we're in growth mode, and to grow, you've got to do a lot of work quickly. We meet every single day. Some may say it's overkill, but we spend 15 minutes going around talking about what we're working on, who can help where. Sometimes it's to help reprioritize. Sometimes we're able to be more helpful to each other. It just depends on the day. And then we're remote, most of us, and we're going to all be together under one roof for a few days in June. And I'm really excited. We have a good synergy. We joke, we get along, we have similar personalities. I did certain things in the interviews to make sure it was a culture fit with me because that's so important. And so I'm excited for us to be in one place all together breaking bread. It's going to be fantastic.
Yeah, what a great opportunity. And remote does create its own challenges, right? I mean,
Yes.
it does. And I'm imagining so in the Silicon Valley world, they would call the stand-up meetings, right? Where we're blasting through what's happening, what are people working on, and doing it every day suggests that there's a lot happening every day.
Yes. And there is, it's constant. And thankfully, the organization has started to recognize these individuals and feels good about reaching out to them directly, which I'm so grateful for. And I think that speaks highly to the people doing the work. But it also means sometimes I have to sort of remind them that this priority for you, the person requesting, is priority 10 in the things we have to accomplish. And so that's when I could hear that and say, hold on, I'll put this at bay. Let's focus where we know we have to focus this week.
Right. So this comes down to it's funny. One of our huddlers has his list of 7 different ways to say no. But if you're really making this transformation that you're describing, where you're moving away from being, delivery, like Marco was talking about, how they were just taking orders, you have to empower your team to be able to say no in different ways, right?
Yep.
Depending on who's asking. It's really hard to say no to the CEO, but they can say, that sounds like an interesting challenge. Let me talk to Lesley and see if we can add that to our list because something's going to have to drop, right? Just training.
Right. Yep.
Great stuff. All right. We will be back with you, Lesley. Now it's time to welcome Isabelle Papoulias, CMO of BackBox and an industry expert who's been here before talking about the first 90 days for CMOs and shifting in position post acquisition. So hello, Isabelle. Welcome back. How are you?
Hello.
Where are you this fine day?
I am great, and I'm in, warm Chicago.
Amazing. Well, and then we're going to get a chance to meet finally, I think, face to face.
Yes. Thank you for having me again, and I'm surprised you're not getting tired of me by now. It's always a pleasure to be here.
Well, fortunately, this is the first time you've been on the show since you were at BackBox, I think,
I
right?
think so.
Okay.
Yes, you're probably right.
So, and since talk a little bit of what is BackBox, and let's talk about that in relation to your org structure.
Yes, of course. So BackBox is a network automation platform. We focus on very security-centric automation for network teams. So, if you want to zoom out a little bit, we're generally under the broader cybersecurity umbrella, but really we work with network teams specifically to help automate work around vulnerability management, device configuration, compliance, and such things. So we save them a lot of time, and we improve the security of the network because it makes network teams, network engineers a lot more efficient and effective at what they do, and it removes the human errors.
Interesting. So it's a technical sell and it's a technical audience. And I'm imagining that has some impact on the folks that you hire or that your team. Talk a little bit about, and especially in the context of what you heard from Marca and Lesley.
Yes, yes. There's a lot of things that resonated with me, but just to answer your question more directly, because it's an extremely technical audience, the role of product marketing is, I don't know even what the word is. It's more important than ever. I come from sales and martech, where yes, you still needed product marketing, but in this highly technical space, you need that link between the market, product, and marketing. Frankly, one, for marketing to be able to truly understand the product, and then the person who can both speak the marketing language, but also speak the language of the buyer and also speak the language of our engineers in house. And the person who's going to keep their finger on the pulse of the market dynamics. What are the customer needs? What are the competitors doing? What are analysts saying? Where is the market going? The person who can really truly lead product launches and major campaigns around product launches. And then the person who can also produce content, again, that's in the language of the buyer.
It sounds like it's funny because when I think of product marketing, I think of a lot of ex-engineers who just sort of like the communication function, but it's almost like they have to have that very strong technical sense. So when you got there, was your product marketing team rocking? Or
So yes and no. They were rocking in the sense that there was a very talented person in that role, and he's still with us, luckily. He was severely underutilized, in my opinion, right? Someone made a comment that their team, when they joined, was extremely transactional. He was essentially backed into a corner, the way I see it. I'm being pretty blunt about it, as the content guy, right? Reacting to whatever sales was asking. We need this piece of content. We need that piece of content. We don't understand how the product works. Let's have a call to explain to us. And he's extremely smart and prolific, and he wasn't he wasn't touching the market at all, right? Like the market knowledge and pulling in the insights to inform marketing and sales strategy. And he wasn't doing anything at all around. Really, we had no campaigns around product launches, and there was no customer marketing. No one was communicating with customers about what was coming up. We had a conversation around essentially how I see the charter of product marketing, and he had, and had broadened his purview as a result, and has helped tremendously across the organization.
so the good news is there was a person there who had the technical chops and understood the product to play the role. Bad news was that they just were caught in this vicious cycle of answering the mail as opposed to strategically driving a business.
That's very well said. That's way better than I said it. I love that.
So that's one, and that's important because you are a technical sell to a technical audience. So recognizing that is critical. And it's funny because it's in some ways very similar to Lesley in the sense that, hey, we are an RFP government service company. So, proposals matter. And that's the sort of the glue of the sales process. So what else was working or not working? And then how have you changed your structure?
I'll continue with what wasn't working, and then I'll talk about what was working, right? We had a big gap in demand gen talent. And in fact, one of the reasons I joined the company is there was no digital engine at all, had never been used. The company was completely reliant on events and PR to generate pipeline. And, some great work had been done on messaging, and we had a great CTO that served as an evangelist. And so we were getting good content and awareness, through PR and great coverage. Events were, generating very top of the funnel pipeline, but, we're not converting into revenue just because it takes much, much longer, right? And we needed to be able to deploy all of the tools within the marketing toolbox. And at that point, we're probably only, I don't know how many they are, let's just say there's 10, we're deploying 2. So demand gen and digital marketing in particular was a gap, and I had to make some changes on the team there. On the plus side, we kind of talk a lot about the changes and what doesn't work, but one of the things that I'm sure we've all done too is you have superstars on the team. You come in and there's people like the product marketer that I mentioned, right? There were other folks that were very strong, and again, we're in this answering the mail kind of a role, very, very transactional role, and our field marketer in particular. And so we kind of expanded her role as well to take on customer marketing. She's now going to lean more into brand and comms because there's so much work that is being done on that side. And, I really need a lieutenant. And so it was, again, identifying people's strengths and making sure that they're in a role that allows us to maximize and play to their strengths and give the most to the team and the organization. So there's a little bit of, do you have any weak players where you need to make a change?
Right.
Do you have gaps, as in you don't have that role and you need to go get that person? And then do you have superstars that are underutilized? It's kind of how I looked at it when I started.
And had there been a CMO in the role before?
There was a person before me that didn't have my level of experience. Basically, that's why they leveled up the role. Yeah.
Well, and that's what I was thinking about is like, if you are running a company, a small company, let's just say, and you just want sales support, you don't need a CMO. You probably are underutilizing marketing. And so it's interesting, in all 3 cases, it was this situation where marketing didn't really exist as a function, a strategic function and asset of the business necessarily. It existed to support sales. And you hire a CMO who can come in and structure an organization that can drive the business forward. And that's just a mindset the CEOs have to make a shift on,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. And if I may add to that, I mean, the person before me was, again, just had a lot of experience, but less experience in terms of sophistication of the background and really number of years ultimately, right? And he had done some great things, like I mentioned earlier, especially the PR side of things. But at some point, it's more about what gets you here is not going to get you there. And I think you can say that about all of us. So they hired me because I had more experience. My title is not CMO, by the way, it's SVP, which, is fine. But my remit was very much, and I know it says CMO here, that's fine, I'll take it. My objective when I was hired and the way I was very much briefed by the CEO is essentially a CMO objective, which was really 2 things come to mind from our discussions. One was, we need marketing to be a strategic driver for the organization, right? So you're leading, you're not following. And then number 2, we need marketing to have an esprit de corps, a marketing team that's really gelling together, is visible within the organization, and is driving the culture of the organization.
Right.
And that requires, a CMO or a certain level of experience to do that.
Well, and it really speaks to this conversation that we're having today, which is you can't, as a leader, SVP or CMO, achieve the goals of being a strategic driver and building a culture without having strong direct reports. And you can't have just these direct reports without the leader to drive it and be able to provide air cover for these folks to say, no, stop it with this request. It's not a priority. Because this is the sort of, what strategy is saying no to something, right? Of course, this show is about emphasizing you got to have a great team and you got to know what the structure is. And it sounds like what's interesting here is in each 3 of these businesses, structure is slightly different, not completely, but because of the nature of the companies. But in all cases, the leader recognizes they're leading somebody. They got to fill their great seats. All right. With that pontificating, we are now going to bring everybody back because we're going to talk about CMO Huddles. And CMO Huddles was launched in 2020. It's a close-knit community of over 300 highly effective B2B marketing leaders who can share, care, and dare each other to greatness. Given the extraordinary time constraints the CMOs are facing these days and the stress penguins that they're needing to squeeze, everything about CMO Huddles is designed to help leaders save time and empower them to make faster and better decisions. So, Lesley, Isabelle, Marca, you are all incredibly busy marketing leaders. I'm wondering if you could share a specific example of how maybe CMO Huddles has helped you. Anybody want to go first?
I'll go first. So two examples I will give. The first is when I was staring down the barrel of transition, Drew and the Huddles team was able to connect me directly with one of the recruiters who had spoken on a show. And so that was super helpful to kind of anchor where I was and where I was trying to go. So that's example number one. Example number two is now being 3.5 months into the role. There's a lot of information out there on the first 90 days, but not a lot on what's next. So I reached back out to the Huddles team and said, hey, how about the second 90 days? Because it's really, I think, I don't want to say easy, but to make an impression in the first 3 months. And so then subsequently put me in touch with somebody who's written a lot about that, blogs a lot about it. And we've since had a terrific dialogue to get my engines spinning on, what do I do next?
I love it. Yeah. And it's funny. I want to see that report. Okay. Isabelle.
Yes, I always, whenever you ask, I give the same answer. What I get a lot at CMO huddles is not just what happens in the huddles that we have, the webinars, if you want to call them, that we have them regularly, but what happens outside of those. Because they're small huddles, it has allowed me to build really one-on-one relationships with other CMOs that I take outside of the huddle. And I can follow up with them directly. And I know kind of people are expert in different areas, and I can set up a call with someone and deep dive on a specific topic. Additionally, again, the continuous learning, the emails that you send out, following the huddles and whatnot. I feel like it's not just the event, the huddle itself, but then there's a continuous loop of, let's call it like interaction around it that I find very, very useful.
I love it. I appreciate that. And you for a long time, Huddler. Lesley.
I would say feedback is invaluable and you can get it there. It's hard to go within your organization sometimes and say, I'm not quite sure what I should do here, but you can do that at CMO huddles. And the other thing is little everyday challenges, trying to find a vendor that you need in certain circumstances. And it's a lot harder to start from scratch than it is to go to CMO huddles and say, hey guys, has anyone ever used this vendor, or do you have a vendor you recommend? And they're vetted and known, and you can go from there.
Appreciate that. Well, if you're a B2B CMO who can share, care, and dare with the best of them, but currently going it alone, do yourself a favor and join us at cmohuddles.com. Let's talk about this. Isabelle, you talked a little bit about the culture and so forth. Talk about the role that you play in sort of building that culture, defining that culture, and then using that to attract talent.
Yeah, it's interesting. So we haven't quite, I mean, the way you're asking the question, I imagine you want to know about sort of employer branding specifically. We are starting to do some things there. We haven't focused on that as a priority, in the last few months, but we are now. So work around corporate values and mission and vision of the organization and so on. But we are doing other things like leading. Well, we have a podcast, internal podcast. It's kind of like an all hands quasi podcast that we call BackBox. So marketing leads that and have guests across the organization on different topics.
That's a fun idea, by the way.
It's a little different, typical all hands with like presentations and, the CEO is presenting. It's really more, it is like a podcast. I mean, it's on Zoom, but it's a Q&A. It's a Q&A and it's very fluid. And
yeah, no, that's really cool. It reminds me of another CMO that I know who for, every week was writing a sort of state of the company address to the folks. There's a way of it became the glue that sort of brought the organization together as it was growing like crazy.
If I can elaborate on that a little bit, culture. So I went to employer branding. I don't know why. That's very sort of like linear. but really, where marketing has impacted culture in the way we work. And I think really that's what, when I was hired and the conversation I had with the CEO was around that. So there's a mindset of, again, leading versus following, right? We're very much, in many ways, driving go-to-market strategy. There's a planning mindset in marketing now. We work with B2 Moms, which is kind of version of OKRs, right? We plan ahead for each quarter. The entire organization leadership team knows that. The way marketing is working, it is more strategic, it's more elevated, and it's more visible across the organization. And in some ways, it's also pulling other departments in, if that makes sense. And I believe that's culture as well.
Yeah, how you work, which is really interesting. I'm wondering, Marco, Lesley, did that spark some thoughts in terms of your role with culture at your organization?
I can chime in. So from a cultural perspective, I think it starts with your purpose as an organization. People want to work for purpose-built companies. So what is it that you're solving in your market? And then how do you attract people into that? And then ultimately, what are your principles as an organization that like support that effort? So, one of the principles that really attracted me to Sensera was this ongoing desire of curiosity. So we have some people in our company. There's one electrical engineer, just incredibly brilliant individual. And he just asks and asks and asks and asks, right? To, in some case, you're like, wow, where does he come up with these ideas? But it's just an ongoing curiosity that he has. And it could be about product, it could be about manufacturing, it could be about a customer. But when I get up in front of the organization, and I've done it now 3 times for our monthly town halls, I can always anticipate that this particular engineer is going to ask me some question. And it's just because he's curious. And so I think the principles that you embody within an organization then help drive that culture. And then to what Isabelle was saying, as a marketing team, we've got the responsibility for employer brand. So, how you push that out, there are various ways to do that. But that's what I would say.
It's funny, as you were talking about your engineer, I was thinking about the 5 whys. I can't remember if it was the founder of Sony or the founder of Matsushita, who kept, used that as a way of sort of getting at to the real insight. But yeah, it's nice if curiosity is part of the culture, because if it isn't, it's a problem. Lesley, it's interesting because you're a bunch of engineers, and marketing isn't. How are you finding the balance then between this sort of need for innovative, creative versus technical?
We just do our best to show options anytime we're trying to do something a little different. Here's the ways we can do it differently. Our graphic designer is really good about that with visuals. And here's how it could look if we wanted to move forward. And then sometimes I just have to be not well liked and say, we are moving forward. And so we love your input, but if you'd rather not give input, that's okay. We're going to do this.
Someone's got to say, we're going this way. I got your input, appreciate it, but we're going this way. And of course, your team needs to know that you're protecting them. This is the hardest question of any way, which is, as a CMO, you have a remit to your organization to deliver a certain amount of revenue and pipeline and all those things. We talk about those metrics, but how do you translate sort of the business metrics of growth to your individuals in your team's performance, given the fact that it's not always a straight line from I'm doing PR and marketing or events, right, to bottom line. So talk a little bit about your metrics and how you look at team performance against sort of individual goals versus the goals of the business. I'm going to pick on you, Isabelle, first.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know that I go as deep with individual measurements, and I'd love to hear what Lesley and Mark are say. But I mean, the V2 Moms, obviously there's owners for each initiative, right? And there's outcomes attached to each initiative. So that goes back to the individual, right? If we deliver on this initiative or not. In my annual performance review document is actually a quarterly performance review document with objectives for the individual, and we review that every 3 months or so. So that's another aspect of it. Yeah, in terms of individual performance, I think those are the 2 things that come to mind.
So in theory, if there well, I'm familiar with EOS and rocks and so forth, but if they're 3 rocks of that quarter they've delivered, then they've done their job. And if in theory those rocks align with the bigger rocks of the organization, then there's full alignment. And so
Mhm.
what makes that work.
Yes.
Marca, how are you sort of evaluating performance and does how do the revenue metrics permeate the marketing metric from a performance standpoint?
Yeah, I think this is an art that we as CMOs have continued to perfect over time. And I've certainly learned a lot from my peers on this. But when I'm in my former company, I had the opportunity to work with a principal at Bain Consulting, and she was brilliant in terms of taking the top level OKRs for the company, like the objectives for the company, and then enabling us to whittle that down then to functional OKRs and then to individual ones. And it was really important in order to get, and this was during COVID, right? So we were all displaced into our homes. So you couldn't have the water cooler conversation. And it was really important for people to have metrics that every day they could wake up and say, okay, I need to, if I'm responsible for social media, one of my things is to 3 posts this week. And then over the course of the month, how have I increased followership as an example, right? And then that ladders up to how are we driving awareness as a brand? And then that ladders up to, okay, what is the customer feedback that we're getting through NPS? As I'm just kind of making this up as I go.
Sure.
So that's what I've done at Sensera. In my first months, I said, okay, and fortunately I walked into an organization that had the established OKRs at the company level. And then from there, I said, okay, what are the objectives for marketing? And then what are the objectives for CX? And I tried to keep them the same, but then the actual KPIs for those teams are different because they're different functions, and then ladder them down to the individuals. And when you get to an individual level, for example, for a technical support person on the phone, it might be, hey, I'm going to write 3 articles for the knowledge base based on what I'm hearing from clients that they're having issues with. Right. And then on a quarterly basis, you go in and you say, has that person done? So we are I've made it very prescriptive. And especially now that I've got RevOps under me, it's even more important because I've also got the SDRs. And those SDRs, they're like, hey, I want to make my bonus. What do I have to do that? And so, yeah, I think the quantitative and the qualitative match are critical in order to keep the organization flowing in the right direction, especially when you're in a high growth company, because you can get bifurcated so fast.
Yeah. Well, and I'm also just thinking about in really thinking about Liz Weissman, the impact player versus a contributor. Is a whole nother thing. And I'm just wondering if the structure and everything, because for contributors, you can say write 3 blog posts and they'll write 3 blog posts, right? But an impact player will say, well, gee, blog posts are for thought leadership. Thought leadership is about differentiating in the marketplace and having a unique point of view. Oh, having a unique point of view means looking at all the other points of view and finding that one. And so suddenly this person is not just writing 3 blog posts, but they're writing 3 blog posts that like are absolutely making, because they're right on the issue that their customers facing. So anyway, I don't have an answer here, or I'm barely even getting to a question, but it does make me wonder how you sort of nurture and encourage impact players versus in the structure. So Lesley, I'm throwing it out to you and save me here. Help me a little bit in terms of your metrics and so forth.
Uh, Really, honestly, Market sort of nailed it. We have the big rocks and they all flow down, and we do each have KPIs. I think that's there is a qualitative part that's very important. And so what I try to do is we know our KPIs, my team is aware of what they are. And I try to go 2 ways. I try to say, which way is best? You tell me which way is best, which way will accomplish whatever this goal might be. So I'm not, again, just throwing write 3 blog posts. I'm saying, okay, what's going to get us the best ROI for this? And then one thing I did at the end of the last year was I put together, and I don't know how much, I hope they liked it. I put together all the wins we had over the year. When you're in high growth, you're so busy, you kind of forget to look back. And I was like, here's how much sales revenue we did. And we know we touched a piece of this because here's our customer journey and here's all the places we're part of. So we know we had an impact here. And here's how many graphics we created, presentations, all of those metrics and numbers. And then also, I'm always thinking of my team. I tell them, keep your resume updated all the time. And that way they can take that with them and they can feel good and own it as well.
Interesting. Yeah, no, I love the sharing the wins. And that's so much part of this is the cheerleading and the culture of success. Okay. So looking ahead, I mean, we've had a lot of huddles on generative AI and whatever, but do you see some emerging skills or roles that you think are going to be critical for marketing?
So I just came from a local, call it chief growth officer group in Denver the other night, and we were having this big debate over, is AI going to take over the marketing function or not? And it was interesting because we were a group divided, and where I land on this is it's not an emerging role for me. It's more of a re-emerging skill, which is the ability to critically think and write. Because I do believe, AI has a place for us in the future, just like for those of us who are, have enough tenure to remember when the web showed up and we were all like, now what do we do? Right. And the fact of the matter is we're all humans, and we need to make sure we're connecting with humans. And at the end of the day, I've used GPT and other tools to write things, but I still find myself having to find that customer connection in whatever it is that it spits out. And I think critical writing and thinking skills are something that will need to come back in force as we get our arms around all of the development that's happening.
It's funny because I've had this debate in real time and in a recent conversation in a huddle because one CMO said this is just another bright shiny object that we can get distracted by, whereas others are saying no, this is transformational, like the internet, Marca. And I of course lean on the side of there are things that are bright shiny objects. This isn't one of them. But however, you're absolutely right in my opinion that the importance of being a good writer now is even harder, is more important. And ironically, a group of people coming up with these tools, chances are they're not going to be, because they have this tool to do it. So it's really going to be hard. You really have to find critical thinking and critical writing in order to get the best out of this. Isabelle, you want to weigh in here?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I don't know that I can think of any new roles per se. Where my head goes is a sharpening or maybe a further specialization of existing roles, meaning, look, it's getting harder and harder to sell. It's harder and harder to buy. What would buyers not, wanting to talk to sales and wanting to have the experience on their own? What with technology getting more complex and the paradox of choice and all those things. And so I almost feel like there needs to be a person that's very focused on understanding the buyer journey, right? There needs to be a person that's extremely focused on the market and bringing, I don't know if you call it insights, whatever you want to call it, the person that's, full-time focused on bringing these insights outside into the organization. These are just variations on product marketing, so on, right? So I don't know that there's a new role per se as much as a fine-tuning of existing ones.
Yeah. I mean, I think the point there, Ian, that is that the CMO's role, ultimate opportunity is to know the customer better than anybody else in the organization. One way or another, that information as you get larger needs to flow back to the CMO. So I appreciate you bringing that up because you could lose that in all the other things that we're doing. Okay, speaking of losing that, we're losing time. So we're going to now go with final words of wisdom for CMOs building or rebuilding their marketing team. We're going to start with you, Lesley Davis. What you're advising other CMOs who are building their marketing team. What's your advice?
My advice would be to not just listen to what you're being told when you're building that team, but to look around the team you have, see the skill sets that they have, and think about not just the next 6 months in front of you, but the next 5 years, and build that way.
Build for the long term, but assess your team on the talent you have in the short term. Okay, that's number one. Let's see. Marca Armstrong. Marca, what's your tip here?
I alluded to this in my opening comments. I think it's really critical that you know your skill set and that you bring people on around you that can be advocates for your skill set, but also support you and be an annex to what you're driving towards. I made the mishap in the past of hiring another me, and then that person ultimately ended up being redundant.
So you really need to know your blind spots, which means you have to be really good at doing a self-assessment and recognizing that. And so maybe ask a former boss, hey, what was I good at? What I wasn't? Just be honest so that you can really fill in. That's great advice. And Isabelle Papoulias, Isabelle, bring us home. Final words of wisdom.
I would say trust your gut more than what others around you are saying. So to build on, I believe that's what Lesley was saying as well. And with that, don't take too long to make decisions about any changes you want to make on your team, any new hires or any, expansion of responsibilities. If your gut tells you something is right or not right or needs to change, it's probably telling you the right thing, and make those decisions sooner rather than later.
Yeah. So, because these are people and these are sort of human decisions where you really are looking at it. And it's funny when we had a conversation the other day and the question is, how long should you wait to replace someone that you don't think is quite doing it as well as they could? And the answer was the minute you thought of it. And which is a little, it could sound mean spirited, but no, what you're really doing is creating an opportunity for this individual to find a better spot for them. So, all right. Thank you, Lesley. Isabelle, Marca, you're wonderful sports. Thank you, audience, for staying with us. To hear more conversations like this one and submit your questions while we're live, join us on the next CMO Huddle Studio. We stream to my LinkedIn profile, that's Drew Neiser, every other week. Renegade Marketers Unite is written and directed by Drew Neiser. Hey, that's me. This show is produced by Melissa Caffrey, Laura Parkin, and Ishar Cuevas. The music is by the amazing Burns Twins, and the intro voiceover is Linda Cornelius. To find the transcripts of all episodes, suggest future guests, and learn more about CMO Huddles or my CMO coaching service, please visit renegademarketing.com. I'm your host, Drew Neiser. Until next time, keep those Renegade marketing caps on and strong.